Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and we're returning to Crackdown 3 to take a look at two aspects of the multiplayer component. And joining me to discuss it, John Linneman.
Rich, how's it going this morning?
Absolutely fantastic. So this is an interesting one, isn't it? It's kind of controversial in a way, because when Crackdown was first revealed in 2015, we saw this amazing Power of the Cloud demo. We got some footage here. Some snippets from an IGN video, which really showcases that, man, they were doing some fantastic stuff here.
Yeah, I was actually at the Gamescom presentation when they first showed this. And, you know, they got up on stage and they showed everything to the audience, and it didn't actually run very smoothly in the demo that we saw. But it looked unbelievable in terms of what they were doing. It's just, you know, they were leveraging the power of the cloud, so they said, to allow unprecedented destruction. And, well, if you've played the final game, you will know that that's not exactly the case.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about the two sides of the multiplayer. I think we should start with the wrecking zone stuff, but we will talk about the co-op a bit later.
Yeah, that's worth pointing out actually. There were two developers producing the two different areas of Crackdown, the campaign and the wrecking zone. But the campaign does allow for co-op, so you can have two-player co-op there. We had some fun with that. We'll be showing that a bit later. But yeah, the wrecking zone, that's what it's kind of all about really. So we had that original cloud destruction system, which was quite phenomenal, and this is the this is the final result in the shipping game. And well, what do you think?
Let's just say that this is a mode that I don't think was ever really worth all the attention that it got in the end. That was a cool tech demo, but what we have is still a tech demo, just a massively stripped down tech demo. I mean, the multiplayer basically consists of a series of tiny arenas rather than full cities, with structures like statues, buildings, and whatnot that can be destroyed, and the destruction is not bad. It's just relatively simple. Every building can be broken up into large chunks that essentially fall from their position realistically, but all the chip damage is missing from that demo. And it just doesn't feel even as impressive as something like Red Faction Guerrilla from last generation, I'd say. But, you know, the thing here, I guess, is that they are using the cloud to synchronize destruction. So that, in a sense, is neat. There is still some of that technology happening here. We have our footage here. You can see the destruction itself is actually synchronized. So what happens on one screen happens somewhere else.
There's some fascinating things here. I mean, there is a destruction model, and it is, you know, at its best, it is quite impressive. It is physically accurate, so, you know, if you've got like one of those statues there, you can shoot out the feet from under it, and then, you know, it'll topple realistically. And yes, as we've demonstrated, we actually got an Xbox One X and an Xbox One S into the same game instance, and we could see side by side that the destruction is you know, essentially identical. So this does kind of prove that there is a server running the destruction model and piping it out to all of the different players. One thing we do need to point out, which is, bearing in mind how stripped back Wrecking Zone is, there's really not much to it, but there isn't even party support in it. We actually had to get both players into the same instance by effectively entering the game, matchmaking at exactly the same time and hoping for the best, and like 4 times out of 5 we actually ended up in the same game instance. But, you know, no party support in a multiplayer game, you know, an Xbox multiplayer game. Remarkable.
Yeah, the lack of party support. So perhaps this has to do again with the synchronization with the cloud and some of the challenges faced there. But either way, like, I feel like that's something that needed to work on day one. This is a game that has, I guess you could say, been in development hell. It's been in development for like 5 years. It's not been a smooth development as far as we can tell. We don't know for sure. But when you finally launch features like this missing, I mean, they have to have known that this was going to cause issues with the community. At this point, the multiplayer isn't interesting enough by itself to make it worthwhile doing necessarily without friends on the same team. In which case, then I can actually see some fun. Like, we actually sort of teamed up within those games, even though we were on opposite teams. We were like standing up there and blasting buildings together, and There is some fun to be had with multiplayer destruction, but that doesn't really make up for...
Yeah, you alluded to this earlier, but yeah, I mean, you're not getting anything like a full city here, and there are a number of compromises that have been made compared to that early tech demo. So pretty much I think the only thing that is in common with it is that there is a server-driven destruction model. But if we look back at that earlier demonstration, they have a whole city there. You don't have anything like that here. And I kind of get the idea they didn't really know what to do with that city.
Yeah, I agree. It really did seem like an experimental tech demo that they were maybe showing a bit too early. And honestly, at that point, it was very rough visually as well. I mean, if you actually look at what is there, it's not a great looking game. It's very low res. But the destruction itself was there. And I feel like this is the kind of thing that really haunts developers for years because, I mean, this was made, I think the claims were made and shown by David Jones, who kind of like stepped away from the project. He wasn't even that heavily involved. I mean, maybe early on. And there was just a lot of confusion over what the heck Crackdown 3 actually is. You know, split between the campaign and this. And, you know, obviously the campaign was a different developer. They never actually discussed this sort of destruction for the campaign. Like, that was not a part of it at all, but they had to deal with it to the point where I almost feel like they should have splintered this off as a completely separate product with a different name and just like try to separate the two, like, because it's not really good for either of them to have this saddle to it, though obviously I guess the review scores haven't helped there either.
I've got a lot of problems with this. Principally, there is so little of that original demo left. The city is gone, the destruction model is massively pared back, and I think a big deal with the original was that you could collapse entire buildings. You know, basically you could chip off the exteriors, the interiors could all be destroyed, but there'd be like a steel frame that each building has. You could destroy that, and they actually showed this incredible cascade of buildings collapsing into buildings. Now what happens is that the steel frame of each building is still there and the skinning is still there, internal destruction is still there, but that steel frame is rock solid, it's not moving, so that cascade of damage is just completely absent. I think more to the point though, if we take what we're seeing here at face value, the game itself just isn't really that great. So for example, the shooting between the players, the lock-on, the auto lock-on from the campaign remains in Wrecking Zone, which basically means that you just can't avoid being shot, which is kind of a bit of a problem here. I was like throwing myself off buildings. You can put yourself, you know, between players, but they'll still get to you. And there's just no real skill involved in combat here, and that's kind of actually my biggest problem. There's not really that much of a game here.
Yeah, and it really feels just very bare bones. And on top of that, we've already noted this is a separate download, and it has its own issues compared to the campaign. Primarily, the performance, for instance, is not at all like the campaign. The campaign was very evenly frame-paced, smooth 30 frames per second, very little in the way of dips. It did lack things like motion blur, I should note. Well, it had a very limited version, which is an option here. But really, Wrecking Zone is all about bad frame pacing. So honestly, the game just doesn't feel smooth. So when you add in the latency between, you know, the different players and some of the lag there, combine that with the bad frame pacing, it doesn't feel good to play at all. It's kind of a mess. I'm not sure that it was a great idea to even finish this aspect other than to save face with the cloud stuff.
It's just a profound disappointment. Yes, the frame pacing is really bad, and it, you know, basically when we first looked at it we thought, wow, this is quite janky, but the actual frame rate in terms of frames delivered isn't actually that bad. There are some pretty noticeable stutters, but general gameplay, you do get 30 unique frames per second. It's just they're delivered in such a weird, wacky order that it just looks as though it's running a lot worse than it actually is. Now, this is something that surely they can patch. So there's a lot of work to do here for sure. The question is to what extent it's kind of worth it. It kind of needs you know, as you say, it needed much more of a focus. The actual core gameplay doesn't really do much. There's a bit of fun blowing stuff up, and I actually think there's a lot of potential in the concept there, but not within the really rigid gameplay structure and the really poor shooting that we actually have at the moment. So yeah, Wrecking Crew, the power of the cloud, the dream of cloud computing kind of collapses, literally in this case. With Wrecking Crew, it's a profound disappointment because, you know, when you saw what that 2015 demo was doing, And all of the noises that Microsoft made about the power of the cloud and, you know, this kind of unique thing that they had. Essentially, the cloud is only really going to present as something game-changing if their streaming system turns out to be better than we expect it to be, because, you know, that is a cloud-based system. It is leveraging the Azure system there. But in terms of actual tangible games that use the cloud, that produce game-changing results, that 2015 teaser, and I've got a link in the video description to the whole thing so you can see it. It's kind of like a pipe dream, really. It's such a shame that we never saw anything that could match that.
Yeah, I might be wrong, but I always kind of felt like it was an attempt to leverage what technology they did have at the time to sort of offset the fact that the Xbox One machine itself was less powerful than the PlayStation 4.
That's right.
At a time when there was that whole narrative around that and everybody was fighting against that. I mean, I can see the marketing team being like, we got to do something, guys.
Yeah.
Because like, there's a point where you just stopped hearing about it, you know? Yeah. Like the power of the cloud, it just stopped. It was not mentioned anymore. And they're just like, yeah, okay, we're done with that. So it really was kind of, to me at least, it seemed like smoke and mirrors. I mean, I'm sure they had stuff running in the background, but how viable it is for actual shipping games like this remains to be seen. And this is not a good example of it. It's just, it's a neat little tech demo that falls well short of the original neat little tech demo from all those years ago.
Okay, so let's return now to the co-op side of the equation, and this is pretty much what we would have expected. There is one key downgrade from what was promised in 2015, which is that we had the promise of 4-player co-op, and what we actually get is 2-player co-op in the final product.
Yep, that's exactly right. I mean, co-op in this game is a lot of fun. I found the reaction to this game rather interesting. I mean, people were profoundly disappointed with it, I guess you could say. But I've actually had a great time with it. I didn't actually expect to even like it very much, but I've had a ton of fun playing it, and we also had a lot of fun playing a short little co-op session there, and that actually works quite well. So I guess, you know, the main thing we should discuss here then that's new is the performance then. So this game does target 30 frames per second on the Xboxes, and currently, at least when it launched, the PC version was also limiting itself to 30 frames per second when playing co-op. But the team has suggested that they are fixing that, and in fact, by the time we're recording this, maybe that's even live. But either way, that sounds like it's going to be settled. But on the Xbox consoles, you're getting 30 FPS with even frame pacing with some slight slowdown. So this is what's interesting, that in the single player, I tried to drop the frame rate hard as much as I could on Xbox One X, and it's very difficult to do. And in co-op, it's still not easy, but I was able to reduce the overall performance level more often when playing co-op. I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but there it is. You can see it there in the frame rate graph. It is certainly a little bit slower than what I was able to reproduce in the single player campaign, but still, it's overall solid. But what about the S then? I mean, you were playing on the S.
That's right, yeah, you were on the X, I was on the S in our co-op session here. The X is obviously smoother. It does still have, you know, tiny amount of issues. There is some tearing, there are some frame rate drops with big explosions. The Xbox One S is kind of similar to what you noted in the single player, which is that it's far less stable. There's more frame drops, there's more tearing, and more stutter. One thing I noted, I was actually getting a poorly rated connection here, which may explain why I was getting audio dropouts, which is kind of bizarre. And generally felt a little bit choppy with the stuttering that cropped in occasionally. Overall though, Crackdown 1 in co-op on the Xbox 360 was amazing, and this is just super fun as well. I highly recommend it. The only regret I do have is that I do think if they'd delivered that 4-player co-op, it would have been absolutely epic. It would have been a genuine sort of big leap over what was delivered on Xbox 360 by doubling the player count in co-op. But this was a great fun, wasn't it? The other thing which I found really quite useful, I was actually just at the very beginning of the game, and I was able to steal some of your higher end weapons, which may have an impact on my single player campaign playthrough, but we shall see.
Well, that's one of the things about this game though that's a positive, is the fact that there isn't really a direction in that sense.
Yeah.
Like the game is just open. You just go wherever the heck you want and see what you can do, and you know, if you find something cool right away, then it's yours to keep. And in a sense, honestly, to me, maybe this is why it ended up appealing to me. It does kind of feel like a retro game.
Right, yeah.
Like, and in the sense that it does, people have criticized it for feeling like a 2007 game, and they're absolutely right. and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in this case.
No, I love this game, but I love the original Crackdown. This is a love letter to the original Crackdown, and certainly in the co-op side of things, it delivers exactly what I wanted there. It's just awesome fun.
So yeah, no real technical problems on it end. Co-op runs great. The 30 FPS thing on the PC sounds like it's getting fixed. You know, it seems to work pretty well. So we had a good experience with the Crackdown 3 campaign in co-op. A not so great experience with Wrecking Zone.
One thing I do want to point out, which you highlighted in your analysis, is that in a co-op session, traffic density for X users and general sort of world simulation will be of a lower fidelity because the Xbox One S version doesn't have that kind of density. I think if you're X versus X in co-op, you'll probably find X versus S, it'll default to the lower kind of world simulation quality. However, as you can see in this footage here, the graphical differences in terms of textures, LODs, shadow quality, all of that remains in effect, so you're still getting all of that. Of course, the resolution, all of that is still in effect on Xbox One X.
Yeah, actually that does remind me of something I didn't get a chance to mention in the first video, is that this does include 4K textures.
Right, yes, exactly, yeah.
So if you're playing on PC or Xbox One X, the download size is larger and you do get higher res textures, which is not the case for Wrecking Zone, where everything is the same file size and there's no real discernible difference there. So yeah, the textures are definitely sharper on PC and Xbox One X in this game.
Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks so much for joining me on this one, John.
Sure thing.
And yes, please do like and subscribe to support the work we do here at Digital Foundry. Ring the bell for instant notifications whenever a new DF video drops. But that's all from me and John for now. Thanks for watching.